Welcome to Best Practice, a show where we interview leaders in the building industry to unpack the tools, tactics, and strategies they use to run great organizations. Today, we're excited to be joined by Amy Howe and Colin Montoute of WXY Studio for a fireside chat about how a cross-disciplinary firm prepares for emerging challenges. Amy Howe joined WXY in fall of 2015. Prior to joining the award-winning architecture and planning firm, she was the director of administration and external affairs at the Noguchi Museum, where she was part of the senior management team that stewarded the legacy of the artist's estate into a world-renowned museum. During her tenure, she played a significant role in increasing the institution's capacity, expanding its outreach and programs, overseeing its multi-phase $23 million capital project, and the development of the master plan. So in many ways, she was the client. She serves on her local community board and is a member of the board of the Asian American Arts Alliance. Colin Montoute, AIA NOMA, is a lead certified architect registered in New York with over 20 years of experience within a wide range of typologies. He has primarily worked on projects at the intersection of infrastructural systems, blended uses, and the public realm, so really large projects. Colin has worked on projects in diverse places like China, India, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Haiti, and the United States. Colin is currently Director of Architecture at WXY, an award-winning firm that we've gone over a little bit. And with that, thank you very much for joining us today.
That's pretty interesting.
Fabulous intro,
Thank
George.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So to start off, I think it might be helpful just to kind of set the rhythms of the practice and kind of like, what's the day in the life look like for both of you? How would you define like the typical work week, month, quarter, and year in your roles?
Oh my gosh, I almost don't want to answer this because COVID, I think this has been really challenging the last year and a half, 20 months. When COVID first started, I think I was coming into the office once a week. And now I'm sort of back 3 to 5 days a week. Every day's a new adventure. Only because we are actually in the process of building out a new office space. And so there's been a lot of changes just this summer through now, packing up the old office. If any of you have ever been to our old office at Center Street, that we're no longer there. We're going to be at 25 Park Place. I'm advertising now. So come see us in 2022. Yeah, so every day's been a challenge.
Yeah, I think so much of our day, our week is sort of three. You can think of it in three sort of buckets. One is sort of managing projects that are ongoing, right, and making sure that the folks that are tasked with delivering on those projects, they have what they need to succeed, right? Whether it's staffing or whatever communications or tools they have that they can deliver on the promise of, what we promised our clients, promised ourselves. And then the other part of it is sort of kind of pursuit, right? Kind of hunter-gatherer part of the effort, where it's a lot of business development, reaching out, communicating with our collaborators, our clients, and whether those are calls or answering RFPs, RFQs, and so forth, and then staying in touch with sort of ex-clients and with people that are interested in us and our work, and then the other part is kind of getting out there and communicating about what we're about to kind of folks like you and to prospective new employees, people that want to join us or work with us. So that's really a large part of how we spend the bulk of our kind of days and weeks.
How about
Chris,
go
ahead.
keep going, Amy.
Oh no, I was just saying, I think from my perspective as, operations and finance too, there are certainly, quarterly things and, preparing for taxes and whatever, but there's definitely a rhythm, but it's been a little bit kind of a touch and go with, also moving and also
Mm.
building out at the same time. So there's just, you know, an onslaught of like,
Stuff.
yeah, exactly. Where do I find this and how do I get that done? You know, so
It's sort of,
it's been fun.
it's sort of, you know, you're moving. It's I'm trying to
Yeah.
think the right analogy. We're sort of moving, but also you have to keep the business running at the same time.
Exactly. Someone's like, okay, I put it in that box, I think. Yeah.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. You want to be a going concern,
Yeah.
but you are moving and building at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a huge challenge.
I've made it seamless, of course.
And well, to add to that complexity is running a multidisciplinary practice. So how does that factor into the already complex nature of these different hats, or kind of shifting, just the shifting nature of the world?
I think, you know, from my point of view, I think, you know, really important to have more communication, over communicate, you know, like we are all working from our desks at home, at a coffee shop, or in the office. I feel like we have to be intentionally much more communicative than ever before, you know, to get across, oh, here's a project, you know, we need, you know, a planner's eyes on it, or a planner might be saying, hey, you know, I'm not quite sure what this building is here for, and, you know, need to talk to somebody. And I think we forget that when we're sitting at home and we're, you know, looking at our screens, we forget that there's a whole studio full of people with expertise in so many different fields that we need to bring together. And I'm really, really looking forward to, you know, us coming back together with a new office, new meeting spaces for everybody to gather and collaborate.
Yeah, I think one of the key things, and Amy has been really helpful in us understanding this, is that, you know, we are architects, urban designers, and planners, right? And those three disciplines they sort of work at different scales, both physically and time scales, and sort of time windows. And each has their own both staffing and financial implications, right? So each want to sort of move, sort of kind of circle each other, if you will, but also advance at the pace they need for them to be successful. So navigating that is a huge challenge with respect to staffing. And again, it's one of the key challenges when you talk about having an interdisciplinary practice. You know, the different disciplines want things to happen at different times.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know if we have all the answers, but definitely would love to hear from the audience about, you know, some of your challenges or your successes that you can share with us, because I feel like, you know, over the 5 years, 6 years I've been with WXY, we've grown quite a bit too. So the portfolio has changed quite a bit. And I think, you know, what we're doing now, we're not the same type of projects that we did 5 years ago. So in that, you know, aspect, you want to make sure that you have the right skill sets you're bringing together, and that we're all moving, you know, at pace with one another. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Colin, you mentioned a little bit about the staffing might be somewhat of a challenge. Is it, are the teams, so let's say I'm an employee at WXY, is it that I'm staffed on one planning project here, or I'm staffed on an architecture project here, like, or are the disciplines pretty clearly defined, basically, and staffing is like, you know, each one has their own staff essentially that works on projects for that discipline?
I think on the front end of projects, when we're doing pursuits and we're doing, you know, what would be sort of the schematic and sort of early DD phase, then across project types, we can very often share kind of staff, right? We're conceptualizing, we're iterating. I think there is when we can have a kind of a fairly easy overlap, let's say, of staff. I think as projects advance and the commitment becomes more critical, what we say, we sort of has to go out the door and stand for us. I think you start to engage a more experienced sort of level of team member and this is true whether it's architecture, planning, and urban design. The thing with the architecture projects is that they can often last, a year, 2 years, 3 years, whereas the planning can be 6 months, 8 months, or the urban design can be a sort of a 3-month, or even let's say a 3-week, 4-week study. So it's these time scales that have an impact on how we, the type of staff that we have, and what we're able to, and how seamlessly we're able to kind of share at different levels of a project's life.
I'm curious about a little bit on your backgrounds. So the Gucci Museum is a background, amazing place to visit. ACOM as well. I'd love to hear how your backgrounds have contributed in this new moment you have now at WXY Studio, like what maybe other unique backgrounds are coming into the office that are making this cross-disciplinary team so vibrant.
I was really grateful that I think, the leadership kind of took a chance on somebody like myself. Again, a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, it was a smaller firm. So the staff size was about the same as my staff size at the museum. I took care of a lot of the finance and operations at the museum for many years, and managed, in the last 10 years of my career there, these capital projects that were pretty big, and raising funds with the city and going through that whole process of designing and building. So I think in terms of management, it was more or less the same level of work that I had coming into the firm. So I didn't really have a big transition in that way, because it was really a lot of, again, finance, operations. I think what was interesting, though, that when I came upon WXY, we really didn't have a marketing department. So I was like the first director of marketing and operations, and really built out that firm size, the team size, to kind of go after the pursuits that we're going after now. And it's been really interesting, and just watching our growth the last few years, and it's been great.
Yeah, I've been both fortunate and unlucky, depending on the day, to work for firms that sort of all different sizes, right? From one of the largest architectural practices in the world to having my own firm, 1, 2, or 3 people, and I think every scale and every type of work in between has provided me certain tools that I could walk away with, that I think influences my thinking about this idea of having an interdisciplinary practice, what that means, and the power that can provide, the value that can provide, the kind of the built realm, and what I try and bring to the practice now, whether it's how sort of on the management side, on the pursuit side, on the kind of production and delivery side, I try and mine that history to bring sort of to bear the best of those experiences to our current situation.
Well, and I also want to add one last thing is, one of the attractions to WXY was the type of work that we do, right? And as somebody who sits on a community board, I was really, really fascinated with, speaking to colleagues about, this zoning change or that zoning change. And so, selfishly, I had a, whole bevy of experts to tap for all kinds of community board questions. Yeah.
And we have such a diverse, we have, within the planning group, we have, economists,
transportation
economists,
people,
we have, people that are quite familiar with real estate development, and analysts, and and across the broad spectrum of what it takes to have a really rich civic realm. We have access to those folks within the firm, and I think that's one of the best parts about working at WXY is access to some of the smartest people within these various realm.
And people who are actually doing the research or the study.
Yep.
And I think, I really am so proud of our staff who are not just, doing their own thing. They have such large interest in
Sure.
the city and
Yeah.
how the city works and what makes, good planning and
Yeah.
sustainability is always,
Good places at every scale.
Exactly. So it's
Vibrant
really,
places.
really fun to work with a group like that. And I think that's another, aspect of my attraction to coming to, an architecture firm rather than staying in the nonprofit world.
With that kind of diversity of project types and the people that are part of WXY, can you walk us through a little bit of like how is the company structured then? Like, is it, when I reflect on what you're saying, it seems like it's kind of like a matrixed organization in some capacity where you have maybe the economists are kind of a resource team, an R&D team that can help interface with any projects across the company. Is that the kind of nature of it? Like, how would you describe the organizational matrix or structure of the firm?
That's a tough one.
I don't think I see it that way. I don't, Colin may disagree with me, but I think because there are so many different types of work, and we definitely do not want to pigeonhole anybody into, a square cog in a, it's just, we don't do that. I think we want there to be an opportunity for everyone to have to be able to participate in a conversation, right? So it's really important for us to, kind of tap the different disciplines and say, okay, we think we have this issue here. What do you think, we'll need to do to examine, deeply what I'll, what the issues
problem,
may be, or the concerns, or maybe the client's not seeing everything. What do you bring in? And so I think we go through some of that at the kickoff with the different disciplines, working from their point of view.
Yeah, and I think that's something we try to bring to a project. And when you work this way, in this cross-disciplinary way across planning, architecture, and urban design, is that very often you engage a client that may well not know what they need. You can show up, they can hire you as an architect, and some way through the process, you realize that, well, this is more of an urban design problem or planning problem, and we have the ability to pivot in-house to bring some of those resources to bear on either an entire problem or parts of a problem that need that type of thinking and expertise. So we, what we're trying to do, and it's a work in process, right? We're trying to kind of break down the walls so that we can communicate across areas of expertise and focus on an issue sort of where it exists and not where we want it to exist, if you will. And I think that's the sweet spot where this sort of kind of multidisciplinary, all of these sort of folks doing that have different levels of expertise, and bring them to the table to answer the challenges that are.
And as a project progresses,
Yeah.
I mean, different people will have different parts to play too. So, like
it evolves.
It evolves.
And we have those resources in house to be quite agile as to how we answer questions and respond to what clients are putting in front of us.
Do you think that this is really the only true way to address the civic challenges that are emerging now that are much different than maybe were around 10 years ago? Maybe they were, but they were more dormant, especially as you prepare for the next 10 years. Like
We
how
think
might
so.
you think about growing that? What may be, is it by doubling or tripling some of these functions, or there are actually additional disciplines that you feel are yet to come into WXY?
Good question. What do you think?
Oh my gosh, that's like a crystal ball question. I I think I think there's still no, no, it's too early to tell, maybe.
I think maybe one of the ways we are addressing some of the gaps in our skill set or our knowledge base is by creating alliances with various partners that extend our expertise into areas where we don't necessarily want to have a foothold. You know, that could be landscape, it could be interiors, it can be publishing. Certainly, our planning group may well, want to author a document or paper or something that might get something published. So we're able to create these alliances to extend our reach beyond sort of what we do in-house, and create partnerships. So that's something we're currently doing, and we've often done, and the principals in the firm have done over the years, to allow us to deliver, again, this idea that sort of answering a problem where it exists, not where we want it to exist, and whatever that may be. I think I've answered your question, but I'm not sure.
But I also want to maybe jumping on that though, this idea of the multidisciplinary practice is not just us, right? It's our community.
Yes.
And I think what you're speaking to, Colin, is so poignant. It's about building those partnerships with people that have the same ideals and same goals. And we definitely have increased that partnership pool over the years, and it keeps growing. We're always looking for new partners to team up with, and we learn new things from everyone.
And that's a great part of it, that we learn. We're quite open to distraction, to divergence, and all in the sake of for the sake of improving the work, expanding our sense of what's possible, and also opening the minds of the client, so that they see that, and also it builds trust, right? If the client, if a client sees that you're quite ready to open them up to answers that you may well not control, there's a sense that you have their best interest in mind. So I think that kind of thinking permeates the firm, and is one of our strengths.
Kind of maybe the inverse of Chris's question, which is trying to address the future in some sense, thinking about the past, and something we reflect to at Monograph is just the kind of changing nature of how technology has influenced the perception of things all the way to city governance. And I'm curious if over the past 10 years, and to your point, Amy, earlier about kind of being in the community itself, do you find that the dynamics have changed between people, like local community groups and cities, to the point where the skill set of the architecture of architecture firms or planning firms has had to adapt to meet it? And that's whether it's adopting more the strategies of community engagement, more so because of how fast information spreads now, right? Perception on a project can change immediately overnight if those concerns aren't addressed up front earlier even, right? And I feel like it's kind of all the evolution of 9/11 essentially, right? The biggest public forum for a big project that happened in New York. Have you tracked that change, or have you gotten a sense of that at all? Has that kind of factored in?
I think it depends on the project. Certainly, we've in our planning portfolio, we've been doing a lot of school diversity and school planning work. And I think you know, look, people just, we need to speak honestly with people when we're in the community. And, you know, I think the best solutions come from having really good, you know, constructive dialogue with people. I think that lesson learned there is key to everything that we do. In terms of the built side, maybe Colin can speak to that a little bit more, but I feel like, yeah, there will be changes. I think, you know, with city government or any kind of government project or any kind of, you know, publicly funded project, right? Who are we doing this work for? And, you know, we always have to keep that in presence, you know, front and center about who we are, what we're trying to help change, and a community that is able to articulate and express what it is that they really want. And I think sometimes, you know, sometimes there are tensions set up, you know, by different players, but I think, you know, we try very hard to go into it with straight, honest dialogues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. I think there's a part of it that it's sort of a realization that there are times when the community you're speaking to has as much data as you have,
Mm-hmm.
and they're as informed as you are.
Mm-hmm.
So the relationship you wade into these engagements, you know, the types of engagements you want to have are slightly different. And personally, I'm still coming to grips with that. Maybe we are as a firm or as an industry, right? So we're sort of in this kind of data rich time where it's really, maybe it's curatorial. I'm not quite sure, but it's a different kind of conversation. It's less one directional in a way. It's more. It needs to be more of a conversation around possibilities and how we work together to create kind of the best kind of civic engagements and types of places that we want to live in.
Yeah, I
And
think
George,
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, George, to your point about technology, I think, you know, you're right. And what Colin said too, that, you know, people are, they have so much information at their fingertips, you know, so you can't really, you know, try and hide anything but how we come together to really figure out how to solve problems, right? I think that's
True.
That's what we need to do, is to be able to come to a table and really have those one-on-ones with people.
And in that sense, maybe what we are conduits for solutions, right? It's less about saying what things are or what they should be, but the means to achieve sort of a shared aspiration, shared goal. Maybe it's something there, that the type of conversations we're having.
Yeah, that really gets to the heart. I feel it's like the need to become a facilitator as opposed to imposing the solution on a community, right? Like, we know the answer. It's not that anymore. It can't be that, because there's no asymmetry of information anymore, right? It's now everyone has the same information. Now it's a matter of like, how do we involve the community more deeply so that it's a win-win scenario for everybody. At the end of the day, everybody's actually coming out of it with something what they want. Whereas before, it might have been like, you know, many years before, it might have been easier for like an entity to impose a solution onto a community. And so that's just really interesting, because I feel like it changes the makeup of firms internally, whether they know it or not yet, right? And I mean holistically, right? Especially when we think about like large projects or in general, it's like something that has yet to like be fully internalized. But I feel like what WXY is saying through the resources that it's and the staff that it's built up, it's really addressing that, right? Bringing economists in, bringing other people. So it's a more, and so back in my mind, I think about like, does a client even see WXY as as an architecture firm, or do they discover that actually it's like a consultancy group? It's like a consulting group, really, right? Where the model is like it's getting fuzzy, right? I think like these things as things progress, right? As everyone has more information, definitions actually become fuzzier about skill sets and what you're bringing in. So I'm curious what you both think about that.
It's a tough one.
I do think people have, I mean, I think certain clients who are hiring us for architecture, right? They know exactly. But then when we start to suggest, hey, you're not looking at this other aspect of your project, let's look at your public space, and then it just goes off into a different direction and a tangent. But I think, I feel like there's a lot of confusion sometimes with the planning side of the work that we do, but you're an architecture firm. Why are you doing planning, And I think it takes time for people to realize that without planning, you really can't do the architecture. In most cases.
Yeah. Or at least to have a kind of, to do it well, and the way we would want to do it is to have this broad understanding of kind of the socioeconomic, political implications of the decisions we make, and that's sort of kind of getting back to how one discipline feeds another, right? And how our planning is sort of a resource for urban design a resource for architecture is a resource for planning. It's this sort of way of working where the different arms of the practice inform each other, right? And elevate and create sort of a value proposition that we think few other firms can provide.
I like that we were going very close in this conversation about sharing the same context, because even before we started this call, in our warm-up room, you were talking about tactically how even amidst all this information and digital working environments, you're still relying on print and paper to work literally on the same page with the client in these working sessions, where you have the same scale, the same context, where the idea is that there's not this extra context that the client doesn't have in hand so that they could feel confident to participate. I feel like the way you described it tactically, just in the level of having a working session with a client, is a great illustration of what you're discussing here, maybe at a higher level, about sharing context.
Yeah, it's and this is where our current remote situation sort of falls apart, is that there are still those times where you want to have a conversation around a common understanding that allows you to sort of move on, right? So you're able to create kind of a baseline of understanding, of shared information, and I think that happens best face to face. Around it could be around a large drawing or plan or image, and so you can have a conversation, and there's certain things we do in person in terms of how we engage with each other that simply can't be done through a screen. So I think it's harnessing that possibility is I think what we're kind of still trying to keep alive, and I think will still be useful as we move forward, even though I think our certain work context will change in terms of how much time we actually spend in an office, or how many times do we actually come in. We're still struggling with those questions, but I think certain types of engagement we still have a great deal of value for how we work.
How about the nature of shared context internally? Like at Monograph, that is like one of our biggest theses, is the idea that if you bring a financial context into a project operations context to your project teams, that project managers can think more like principals, designers can think more like project managers. So there's a better graduation up to context. So I'm curious how context, I just like how we're talking about context and sharing context, sharing disciplinary ways of thinking. How is that shared internally in in the office, either at a management level or, you know, financial level?
I think I think we're still working through a lot of those contexts. And again, you know, we grew, I think, quite a bit since COVID. And, you know, with the types of projects that we've been working on since COVID, it's changed some of the internal structures. And so we've been actually reorganizing ourselves a little bit in the last 18 months or so. And I think we're on course. We're definitely getting everybody, you know, information and trying to be more structured about having those contextual conversations. I think it's coming to, you know, that point, right? It's not about, you know, necessarily, you know, a billing info, you know, that is missing, but like, let's get to, you know, where the progress of the project is going. And so I think we're doing much better at formulating some of those structures.
Says the woman when it all falls apart. So it falls in her lap.
When it all falls apart, it's on me.
So it's up to all of us to really, as we figure this out, how to, like, what information do we need to do our jobs, right? And to be effective, and what do we need to understand so we can make smart decisions on a daily basis, right? So part of my job, part of our job, is to give our teams what they need to be successful, right? And to thrive, and to be vibrant employees, like within the firm, but not burden them with things that really, you know, they shouldn't be worrying about. Right? Kind of remove all of that stuff, right? Kind of smooth the pathway for them. So we're still, to my mind, I think we're still figuring that out. What that information is, what are those tools that allow people to step in, get what they need in terms of information wise, and kind of step out of that flow, because it can be burdensome, I think, to many of our staff. And this is a conversation we're having. I mean, we had the conversation this morning, and we'll have it tomorrow morning. But I think that's a large part of what we're currently, you know, talking through on a daily basis, and and the tools we use, and blah blah blah.
For that kind of ongoing conversation, is there any source of inspiration or any outside of maybe even architecture that have come into the conversation about, like, well, you know, what basically, like, a Monograph, for a lot of things, we are always looking towards, like, what's the cutting edge thinking from software engineering on management, because for whatever reason, software engineers are light years ahead on managerial practices than most any other industry. I'm curious on, like, what other, you know, what else is entering that conversation to helping to inform, you know, managerial innovation within the firm, I guess.
I feel like a lot of that is tied to strategies, and you know, right? Everybody's going through a strategic thinking every 14 months, something like that.
Maybe less.
or less, every 12 months. And so often, you know, we get to a strategy and we're like, okay, let's pivot this way. And all of a sudden you're doing a totally different type of work. And you've got, you know, a totally new group of architects, you know, interested in whatever it is, right? I feel like, I think strategy for every firm, like, that drives that particular
strategy, and then alignment, right?
Yeah.
Across your practice. And then there's a question, you know, you have a strategy, then you develop a tactic, and then what are the tools that allow you to implement it? And that's, again, we're right in the midst of that conversation. So, you know, we sort of have our strategy, I think. You know, please feel free to tell. I've only been here 6+ months.
2022 will be a different strategy.
Will be a different strategy. But I think we're becoming more and more aligned as to what it is we want to do as a practice, where we want to position ourselves relative to, and let's say infrastructure or transportation or education, or, all of these, there's a place where we can sort of, if you will, carve out a place where we can sort of express what we care about and what we think others should care about as well.
Yeah, for us, it's like, so for some backstory, about a year ago, we were about 8 people, I think. Now we're about 40, right?
Wow.
And so, the recognition that communication breaks down I think it's like after 30 it breaks, and then like after maybe 60 it breaks. There's like a doubling effect that just like whatever was working for you just doesn't work anymore. And I'd imagine that's, COVID ultimately compounds that challenge too, if you're growing within it. So, it resonates with us too, because we're actively always, there's a saying of like, you're building the plane as it's flying, sort of thing.
True.
Right.
True.
And that's just kind of the nature of trying to be, to listen to like the reactions. And we so I completely resonate on that front.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. Maybe not for people flying the plane, but I think it speaks to that kind of openness and the ability to take risk and the ability to
confidence in what you're putting out. You can stand behind it. And of course, you have to do the work. You have to follow up and make sure. But I think you have to be open to sort of new things, new ways of thinking, new. It has to inform you. Otherwise, to my opinion, I feel you're going backwards unless you're sort of and today more than ever, right? Where there's so much stuff flowing at us that have the potential to influence and impact our work. We have to sort of be open and continue having discussions internally and externally.
Yeah.
We'll transition now to some questions, I think, but
sure.
From the audience, but I feel like
sure.
the the rate of change is it's so fast that openness has to be a default mode of operating.
Yeah.
And it's because a lot of, I think, the assumptions, if you rely on the assumptions you were using about how things worked 10 years ago, you're already so behind, exponentially behind.
10 months ago. 10 years
10 months ago. It's like, it's already a whole different thing, right? And so I think that is one of the things we talk about, is this idea of practice operations, where it's like we feel that partly what we think is going to happen in the industry is there will be more focus on operations, but like not like operations in the sense of like HR and maybe finance, really more of like completely reimagining how operations works across functions, meaning all the way from marketing, from everything from bringing work in to getting work to come back in, right? The whole journey. And that it's going to be really driven through data ultimately, because that's one of the assumptions that has changed. It's that data sort of lives in silos, but nowadays it doesn't have to. And what could a firm do if it were to reimagine itself through that? And I feel, that's kind of a narrative that Monograph lives on, but also I get the sense that this operations in general is going to be one of those things that just has to be default on with firms. Like they have to hire, if you're like starting out an office now, you got to have operations within your first 10 employees, because you need someone that's thinking about the future of how we work, not about how we work today necessarily.
Exactly. It's critical. You just can't assume that what you knew yesterday is valid today. It's a scary proposition, but here we are.
Yeah.
Here's a question from the audience. How does one pioneer a new division in an architecture firm? Colin mentioned new unfamiliar territories like publishing as a potential viable route to growth. How can one be persuasive in getting the right people in the firm to buy into the new idea?
You.
I think it's both of us. It's definitely you. You go for it.
Oh boy. I think, I think you have to make a value case that what you do in the practice can feed the practice. I mean, we're businesses, right? So, and the way I would do it is create a proposition that has value to the firm itself, but also has this larger mission to the industry as a whole, or to that kind of sharing idea. So in terms of publishing, it's aligning. Is there something that you want to say that has value to others and that can help elevate the firm or the conversation that a firm or practice is having? And I would look for that and then seek out like-minded souls to support that interest.
There's another question. It's a community favorite. What is a lesson you did not learn in school?
I went to art school. Sorry.
What lesson I didn't learn? So what I didn't learn was that architecture means different things to different people. And you have to frame your conversation based on their understanding of what design is, what architecture is, what architects do. So depending on their lens, you actually have to shift your lens so that you can speak with them on the same plane. So I think that's it. I think that's one of the key things that sort of over the years, oh, okay, all right, I have to be able to be sort of kind of shift how I talk about what I do depending on the audience and their understanding of what an architect is and what we do.
And for me, I think operations side speaking, yeah, I wish I had a law degree. I feel like, all you do sometimes you're reading all these government, paperwork and you're like, what's this going on? And
nonstop.
It is nonstop. So that's one thing I didn't learn in art school. That
it's like the amount of legalese we have to sift through is
mind-boggling. I'm sure the audience has a lot of that too.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Colin, I'm curious. As director of architecture, one characteristic about leaders that I find very common is that it's constant repetition. You find yourself repeating the same thing over and over again because you have to, because people, it's necessary, and actually like that's part of the role essentially. But I'm curious, like, what do you find yourself like basically the lessons you've picked up along the way? And you mentioned a little bit at the beginning. I'm very curious to maybe unpack a little bit about the things that you've picked up on that you find yourself advising people on a daily basis or weekly basis, whether it's like the advice you wish you would have had earlier, or from that perspective, and you're curious to hear.
Yeah, sure. I think as we're currently interviewing, right, I think I can approach that question through that lens, that I'm looking for team members. So kind of a strange thing to say, but team members that can elevate others, right? So that can position themselves, that has they can bring something to the table that elevate their colleagues and are willing to share it, right? What else have you got? I mean, but what's your differentiator? What is your what of yourself are you bringing to the table that helps broaden our discussion within the practice, and that perhaps can elevate the work or the people around you? So that, I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question, but
sure.
But that's one of the key things that I'm looking for when I speak to a prospective kind of employee. I'm looking to have a conversation as to there's, what else are you bringing to the table other than what you're showing me in your CV, your resume, or your work samples? Like this is a conversation within the firm. It's kind of this ongoing conversation. What can you add to that conversation? So I think that's one of the key things that I'm always trying to get people to invest sort of in themselves and in the practice.
Amy, from your perspective, I'm curious too about, while you might not be involved at a granular level on like projects necessarily, what do you find kind of like the things that you feel have been helpful to you that you've helped to communicate to others too along the way? Like, do you have like go-to lessons learned that you like to share for people as anecdotes even?
I think the go-to is that, I mean, again, I'm kind of new to the industry, right? So I can't speak to how others do it, but what I found, coming into a firm that was about 20, and now, then we went to 50 in a short time, that there's a lot of administration, running a business. And I think, very often you have architects or a team of architects thinking, oh, I'm going to build the most gorgeous building without realizing all the admin stuff that comes with it. And I think it's it's a very big burden for an architect to deal with, HR and finance and all of that. I mean, understanding what you can delegate to somebody else, how to build that team to support the function of the entire architectural practice, that's a lot, and it's not something that comes easily with some people. I think some people would like to hang on to, all the, be hands-on in everything. And it's like, no, you can't. You need to concentrate on designing and, building and, BD, but let others do,
What they do best.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it. I'm finding out, as we're getting into larger infrastructure projects, the mountain of paperwork. And no architects want to do that.
It's incredible. How much paperwork.
But understanding, what each firm's admin needs are, I think, because that's the other part of it that you can't.
Because you can't function without it.
No, you can't function without it. And you can't buy it off the shelf.
You can't buy it off the shelf.
No.
You can't function without it, and it needs to be tuned exactly to your needs.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's critical.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to end with a favorite conversation or question that we like to ask all of our guests. And if you've heard any of the ones of our previous podcast episodes, you might already have a hint as what it is. But most people don't get all the way to the end. So we'll see. The question is, what's the nicest thing anyone's ever done for you? And we like to bring it back to being human at the end of the day. We talk a lot about business, but we business is made up of people. And we always like to end on a really positive note. So we get all sorts of answers for this question, and whether ranging from personal to business, but we'll let you decide what you want to share.
Tough question. I mean, so many people.
It is a tough question.
So many people have been incredibly generous to me. I'm quite lucky in that way. I mean, I've had, if I, maybe I can reframe it as sort of a formative moment professionally. Is that, I mean, I had the occasion fairly early in my career to work for Max Bond, sort of one of my first. And he really helped me, as a person of color with not many sort of images of how to do and where to be and how to. He was just so incredibly generous to me in terms of asking me questions I couldn't answer and I'm still trying to answer, and helping me sort of decide who I wanted to be when I grew up. So I mean, I look back on the brief time I had to work with him, and the incredible generosity he showed me as one of the formative months that I still hold on to and look back to this day. So I think, I mean, I think that's the thing that has helped me sort of I've carried with me all these years later.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I appreciate both of you for sharing that and being so open, and throughout the whole conversation, just being so open about where you're at. I think that's the whole core of what we're trying to do here, is just like open up a conversation about the challenges we all face and where we're at different stages of our practice, or as people. And so I really appreciate both of you for coming on and sharing that with us.
Thank you for having us. It's exciting to talk about these critical questions, and whatever we can share, I think we're so happy to do so. We love this industry, so to share with like-minded folks, it's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And come see us in 2022 when we're back.
Well,
New space,
New space.
big party.
I don't know. Well,
You're
we'll
all
see.
invited.
We might. I don't know. I don't know if Chris knows this actually. I'm looking at Arc League. I may be going to the Arc League party.
Yeah, look us up. Yeah.
It's going to
definitely.
be. I think it's in January, late January, or something like that. So
Yeah.
we might be
Please.
down.
Stop
Well,
in.
Well, will you be in the new office by early January?
Well, I'm in the building.
It's a very delicate question, George. I think you're asking. I think you're causing trouble.
I'm in the building. I
All
just
right.
don't know where I'll be, but you can
All
find
right.
me here.
I'll bring some boots. If we have
There
to
you
go
go.
office, right? There you go. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, Chris, for
Thanks, George.
joining me.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
George. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you all. Bye now.
Bye.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Bye.